Whenever you're ready, partner.
All right. Okay, this is Brent Rains for Alternate Perceptions Online Magazine. It is about midday, Tuesday, January 14th, and I'm talking with a gentleman right now out here in Missouri I've been talking with for several months, I guess going back about a year now, Lance J. Dorrel. He's an author, an ethnographer, and is ever since he was a young boy, he's been very interested and fascinated really with the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And he recently came out with a book, The History They Tell, Oral History from Native American First Nations People regarding the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He's got a lot of oral history from many different Native American tribes. And anyway, I will just let him tell you the book just came out in November and about himself and his work. You ready, Lance?
All right, thanks, Brent, for the introduction.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, so
Thank
I'm
you.
Lance J. Dorrel. I grew up in Northwest Missouri, but I'd always had a fascination since a youngster. It started probably about 1976 with the Battle of the Little Bighorn. That fire was always stoked, thank goodness, because of my mother and maternal grandmother, her mother, who were always taking us to the local library. And of course, there was a library on the local college. So I was very blessed with a mother and a grandmother who encouraged reading. So I just had always been fascinated, dove into it. Of course, you know, the late 70s, there's only so much material you can get at a small town library, and then the college library had a little bit. But I remember watching the late Western show one Saturday night with the maternal grandfather, and there is George Custer with, I think it was Robert Shaw, and I think it was called Custer of the West. And my maternal grandfather was straight out of a Faulkner novel, kind of a rough, tough guy, jack of all trades, farmer, heavy equipment operator, over-the-road trucker. Loved college football, loved pro football, but this was the first time that I connected with him about the history in American West. And so, you know, kind of gravitated to that. But I got very lucky later on when I started to meet a lot of Native American people as my trying to understand what happened there progressed. And I was very lucky going to the battlefield. I'd always go up there, meet groups of people who would study the battle. A lot of these gentlemen were authors and historians in their own right. Many were ex-military. And so I got this incredible chance to tag along for about 5 years with these people who had ferocious readers and had studied this battle. And I quickly realized if I wanted to keep coming out here, I needed to step up my game, right? I needed to read a little bit more. But I was doing that, but I could never grasp what happened at the Little Bighorn, one of history's greatest mysteries, right? Custer's last stand. But I was really more interested at this time now who the Native American people were who were there. Why do we not have more of their stories? And, you know, there are books out there, of course, but it's fragmented. And they weren't given the due justice of their part or their part of the story. And so I was, again, very, very fortunate to meet a man named James Putt Thompson and his family, who just happened to own the Custer Battlefield Trading Post, which is right across U.S. Highway 212 from the entrance into the battlefield, okay, at Crow Agency, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
And Putt's right at Central Casting. He's got a great little museum there, good bookstore, good little restaurant, just a place you got to go if you go to the battlefield. And I'd gotten to know him over a number of years, and he said, you know, look, if you really want to understand what happened over there, meaning the battlefield, he said, you're going to have to get to know the Native people a lot better than you have been. And I said, yeah, I'm all ears. And over the course of a year, he introduced me to several Northern Cheyenne elders. And with that being so, that opened up a lot of information that I was able to learn about the battle, But more importantly, I was able to learn about protocol and procedures on how to visit with people that are Native American and First Nations, on how to ask for this information and how to learn from those folks. About the same time then, I met Donovan Taylor, a Northern Cheyenne tribal member who grew up in Busby, Montana, not far from the battlefield. And Donovan had a insatiable thirst, just like I did, about what happened at the battlefield. Just so happens Donovan's a dog soldier of the Warrior Society today. He's actually the drum keeper. And of course, the Warrior Societies today are much different than they would have been back in the late 1800s, but they're still, their goal is to look out for their community and protect their people. And so we became fast friends. Donovan taught me about protocol and procedures, and we just started running around the reservation as best we could, going to see elders and other folks who wanted to visit about the battle. And of course, that entails taking food and tobacco. We won't get into all the specifics, but that's a good start for anybody who's interested. And at the same time, I had developed a lot of contacts across South Dakota, namely at Rosebud, Pine Ridge, Cheyenne River, and a few at Standing Rock with the Lakota people who are also at the Little Bighorn. And Donovan, at the same time, knew many folks who were Grovant and Arapaho. And so as you progress with this story, the standard story is the Little Bighorn, the warriors who were there were led by the stalwarts of Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, the Lakotas. There was just a few Cheyennes fighting and only a handful of Arapaho. Well, over our 6-year investigation, we quickly realized that that was not the truth. And the oral history was still alive. It was still very plentiful. And the story talked about many, many more Cheyenne fighting that day. Many of them were very young. There was even young gals fighting and women fighting. And there was also many, many more Arapaho there. The standard story is only the 6 Arapaho or 5 Arapaho came. We found that there was actually 3 groups of Arapaho there. There was actually a larger contingent of Grovant there. The Grovant and Arapaho were one at one time. There was also a few Blackfeet, a handful of Cree, Dakota people, Nakota. And if I'm leaving somebody out in that process, I apologize for now. But the standard story was not what we were being told. Okay. And so we knew that we had to possibly get this out. The elders had always encouraged us to take this information down and save it for posterity and put it out in some form. And so we just started doing that. We just went around as best we could with time and the resources that we had. We would go visit the TPO, the Tribal Historic Preservation Offices, and their officers. We were very, very fortunate, and I mean very fortunate, to catch a lot of these folks before they made their journey. And so as we went on this journey, my whole understanding of who the people of Turtle Island of North America are was turned upside down. And you know, I thought I had a grasp on this, as we all do, right, when we're in this field of study. And it's not because you read, but in visiting with so many elders over a 10-year period. But the more I got into the Little Bighorn Trail, the more my eyes were being opened. And these elders kept saying, everybody was one at one time here. And it takes a while for that to sink in our Western mentality, right?
Right.
But once that was in my psyche, other bits of information started to come. And that's the information that you and I talk about quite a bit. That's the stuff that you and I like to talk about. I never in my wildest dreams believed that it would collide like that. And so what you have at the Little Bighorn is this collision course with the United States Army, George Custer, but you have the people who are there are just not Native and First Nations people. They were so much and are so much more spiritually, and in other means that people just have no idea. And so the elders kept saying, get this information out about the battle, who's really there. That was their focus. Get the people, get the information out, okay? And again, many, many more Cheyennes fighting, youngsters fighting, women fighting. The whole village put up resistance that day. It wasn't, it was a group effort to thwart the cavalry. They were not going to be taken that day, okay? But it's the underlying pieces of who's there that we really need to start paying attention to. And with all of this disclosure coming across now in mainstream society, right, about who we are as a people and what we're capable of as human beings, possibly spiritually and intellectually, this just went hand in hand. And so when you understand who the people are, that they were all one at one time, and that they were so strong in their beliefs and spirituality, they believed that encampment on the Little Bighorn was cloaked in an invincible shield, you might say, from their creator. And they weren't going to be defeated that day. Okay, so you get that in your head, you understand that, you move on down the process. But what I became fascinated was just who were these people? And I mean, I took a deep, deep dive into this as best I could with the elders' guidance and visiting with their historians. And repeatedly, a lot of the same messages were shared with me. And I can share some of them with you for now. But the point being was the people would talk about where they came from, and it was the Star Nation, the Star people. Again, it takes a while in our Western mentality, right, for that to sink in. And so once I was able to fully grasp what they were telling me and being very patient with me, thank goodness, you dig into these histories and stories and you look at what does this tribe say versus this tribe? What linguistic stock are they labeled at? All those things. And you see many of the same similarities in the stories. And I'm not saying the same story specifically, but I'm talking about the same beliefs. And as I was going on this journey, I was meeting many, many elders. They would like to visit about these things. And so they kept giving me encouragement, and I was very blessed and steering me to other elders across other reserves all across Canada and the United States. And so it was a whirlwind trip, and it still is. But they were sharing just these incredible stories of these cultural heroes, creation stories, stories of floods that came, where the people came from. But the same overriding arching story was everybody was one at one time. Okay? No linguistic stocks, no tribal designations. They were all on Turtle Island together. Eventually, there's cataclysmic events, and eventually, the people have to start to split over resources. But that's the journey that I was fortunate enough to have come into my life. And for all intents purposes, I guess you might say it helped me open my eyes, and then my heart opened up, and then I become a better researcher and kind of what you might say awoke. So I'm blessed. So that's the story of my journey to the Little Bighorn in a big nutshell. So I went in a big circle, partner.
Yeah, yeah. And of course you love chasing history, and you've been on quite the chase. And
Well, thanks.
and also we've talked in regard to the original people, the creation story, and the star people. And I don't know if you want to get into it now or maybe later, but the what we've referred to for years as Bigfoot looms prominently within these stories, and it's uh, there's a lot of connections between the different tribes about it, and you want to tell about
Yeah,
that?
sure. I'll let me, I'll tell you about my journey and how that all intersects, and then we can kind of talk about it on the peripheral edges of what I could say about it. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
Again, I had no idea this stuff would intersect. This stuff was the furthest from my mind. I'm just trying to understand what happened at the Little Bighorn, right?
Hmm.
And the more I got into the cultural aspect of these things, you might say I had some ontological shock, right?
Oh,
But
yes.
uh, again, it was I was blessed. I knew I was very, very, very lucky. Excuse me. But I also knew that with great knowledge came great responsibility. And I'm not saying I have great knowledge, but I felt like I was having a lot of great knowledge shared to me. Okay. And again, I'm just trying to understand who these people were and are and what they were capable of. And what is so surprising about all this, Brent, is, and this goes back to the Little Bighorn, that with these oral histories these people were sharing about the Little Bighorn on one side and this other ancient history, much of it had been shared to historians, to ethnographers, to the white race, but it had been completely obliterated and ignored and pushed in the back of a book or an endnote or a footnote, right?
Yeah, they wanted to write it their own way.
For sure. Absolutely. And so when I took this deep dive, and what we did at the Little Bighorn was our book has 20 chapters in it. And I made sure that I compared what had been shared with us via the historical record at the end of each chapter. Okay. You'll be surprised, partner, how a lot of that information had been shared by warriors or people who had been at the Little Bighorn or had a descendant. It's sitting right there. And so I did the hard part for everybody so they don't have to go looking for it. I put it right in the book, and we have copious endnotes. Okay. But
Hmm.
on this journey on the other side of things, and it started with the Star People story and understanding the connection with those people and the history. And then, of course, Americans have a fascination with the UFO world, right? We want to know. I believe it's very good now that it's being discussed and there's no criticism. People can have conversations without being stigmatized about this story. And we need it to come out for our future generations, our kids. And we need to be able to encourage them to chase their dream, chase history, and to be able to have dialogue. But the stories that were being shared to me had to do with certain places and these cultural heroes and certain gifts given by the Star People to a certain tribe and band. Okay. And, I was fascinated about that. I would visit with the people as much as I could. But you have to go slow with this. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't overstepping my bounds. I didn't want to intrude. You don't want to ask for too much information because I didn't want to seem greedy. But this was a long, long story, a long journey, excuse me. The people were very, very patient, and I was blessed again by so many elders who helped and wanted to share. And so you got on one hand, you got the story of the Star People and these different tribes, right?
Hmm.
Then you have these stories of these cultural heroes, and I'm not going to name them here, but what I found to my amazement was one of those cultural heroes was not what the books had lead us all to believe. This cultural hero seemed to be prevalent in all kinds of Native peoples and First Nations peoples' histories. And these are people who are Algonquin speaking people. For instance, that would be people who are Cheyenne, Arapaho, Cree, Ojibwe, Blackfoot, Grovant. And it was also, she was, this culture hero was also prevalent with the Lakota people. And I saw that pattern and I saw this developing. And once I was able to have conversations with the elders and other historians, I started to see the history, the true history coming out again. Okay.
Mhm.
And this story had been recorded, but again, it's been glossed over and ignored. There's another cultural hero. I got to be careful here. Prevalent amongst one of the linguistic stocks that's huge across North America, excuse me, United States and Canada. And this certain cultural hero seemed to have stepped into a conflict with star people and rid the I don't want to say the planet, but let's just say rid the United States and Canada, geographically speaking, of a certain bad race of, I think we want to call them aliens, extraterrestrials, but those extraterrestrials or aliens may have always been here. Okay, I want to be very careful with this. I don't know for sure, right? Uh, so that story, of course, intrigued me greatly. It still does to this day. I'm always looking and visiting with people about it. But that part of it, then what I found from other tribes who are similar speaking linguistically, they had stories of battling those same aliens or extraterrestrials clear up in northern Ontario. So to put that in perspective, you have people of the same linguistic stock battling these creatures. All right, again, they may be indigenous to this planet. We don't know. That's the beauty of this journey, right? We're always trying to learn. And then you've got another group of people who are their kinsmen, similar speaking people of the same linguistic stock, battling these same aliens or creatures in the heart of the United States. It floored me, because my God, here's this history. What even astounded me more was once I got more into it was the prototype gray, right? The gray alien. So many tribes told me that they had fought those grays, so to speak, and Brent, that those grays were actually indigenous to this planet. Now let that sink in for a minute, okay?
Is that kind of like the ant people that were taken underground during cataclysmic event? I understand. Like, um, I think the Navajo had stories about this, and out in the Southwest. But anyway,
I'm not sure if I don't believe it's the same. That's more towards the Hopi, Frank Waters and his research, but the Greys played such a prominent role in this, and it wasn't good. They were not good. They still aren't good. And I'll stop there with that. But it was a constant conflict with whatever the Greys are. Okay, so we've got this one group, we got the Greys, and then eventually I started to be educated, so to speak, on a lot of other ancient history. And this is where you and I always talk about this, and I find this fascinating, and I hope the listeners will too. The story of the Atlanteans and the Lemurians played into this, right? Because with these ancient stories, they talked about the red and brown race, the white, the black, and the yellow. And we won't get into all that for now, but the point of it was the red and brown race were native people of this earth who had been infused with a higher form of spirituality and consciousness. And we can leave it at that for now. They were blessed by the creator and the star people.
mhm.
Eventually, the star people got involved and started meddling with, you might call the white race, to bring them up on par, so to speak, right? And ever since that happened, there's been a lot of strife and turmoil. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole, and that's a lot of deep, dark history there. But it doesn't take somebody who's into this too much to figure out where I'm going with that, right? So that's a good start for now.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's a lot of deep and unique history that doesn't get really talked about or even known really until you know areas you're covering, getting the oral history from all these different tribes and presenting this unique insight. And to me, you sound like a walking encyclopedia on all this. Although I know you're thinking, no, no, I still got so much further to go, and it's it's really a deep dive into that you're taking, and you've spent decades of your life at this. You've been adopted by two different tribes, right? And I mean, there's a lot of respect among a lot of the people.
Well,
That,
I wasn't adopted by the whole tribe. I was adopted by families.
two families, right? Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries.
But yeah, and so this is our first interview, and I I've got a notification here that I had just uh, probably about 8 more minutes before this thing shuts off because I got the basic Zoom. I'm learning here.
Yep, no
So
worries.
and so hopefully this video will save. If not, I am recording this independently with another recorder. So at least I'll have the audio and we can work with that. But I hope that this will show. I'm all thumbs here.
No,
Hopefully it's thumbs up. But anyway,
no worries.
but yeah, I of course want to dive deeper into this in the future. So this will be our first introduction of uh, these areas that we'll expand on further as time goes on.
You bet. Be glad to do the best I can to help. And the best thing we can do is try to share this information so others on this journey can learn. It doesn't do me any good to have this. All I can do is try to relate what I have been lucky to learn and shared, and get it out there to the people as best of our abilities. If not, then I don't believe we're being very good humans here. So we've got to start sharing and trying to help those that are on their own journeys and seeking what they're trying to understand. And I mean, look, you and I talk about this all the time. Disclosure is happening, right? It's happening across America, Canada, South America, Europe, Australia. It's happening. There's no reason not to get this stuff out. We have to be respectful. And I don't mean get the native or their Aboriginal people's information out. I'm talking about having these conversations about what went on with history, how it interacts. And if we can add a little bit from the indigenous people, then that's even better, okay? Because they've been here, they've interacted, and they've been interacting and surviving for a long time, okay? And it's high time we listen to them, and it's high time that they're at the table. And I mean at the table to educate and to help, because they will, bless their hearts, despite everything that's been done to them by society,
Mhm.
they're willing to help us.
Yes. Yeah, I've been interested in, but I haven't gone as certainly as known all the people and taken the deep dive that you have. But my wife, of course, as I've told you, has Cherokee ancestry, and we've actually had a sweat lodge behind our home here, kind of Lakota style. We had a friend from Alabama who had been out to Montana and had actually worked with a Assiniboine elder and used to drive him around to uh, different gatherings where they had, sweat lodges and such, and she
Mhm.
would attend those. And um, yeah, it's so we've kind of learned a lot from her in her journey. And my wife and I back in the 70s, mid 70s, we met Native American Sequanahawk, although people from Pennsylvania probably, I know they pronounce that group a little differently than I just pronounced it. The way I read it was Sequanahawk, and this elder would talk about, the Star people, and actually claimed a ship landed by his house, and these tall beings he called the Udashqua. They had to bend down when they came in, but other times they were actually spirits. A little figure about 4 feet tall with pointed ears, and said it didn't appear to have any sex, and appeared in his house, and all these stories that he
Mhm.
had. And his wife had drawn out on she was Native American as well, but different tribal background. But yeah, I told, uh, drew on an envelope for me, which I made a copy of, what she called the fire canoe that landed in their backyard with these Yudashqua beings. And
Wow.
I remember him telling me, he says, you got to say it, Yudashqua, it's guttural, how you pronounce their names. I said, okay. But yeah, it was quite an interesting thing to. I had two visits at their home. One of which, the last one was, I had my wife. Well, we weren't married at the time, but I was taking her home from Tennessee up to Maine to meet my parents, and we stopped. I knew she had a great interest in Native Americans, and yeah, I've told you about the experience he had when he said, well, after we had a meal with him, went into the living room and he sat down on a little sofa. We sat together on a divan, and he said, "Now we have a powwow." And he pulled out his pipe and started smoking.
Mhm.
And I closed my eyes, just kind of went into a meditative state. But Joan said that, and we didn't even talk about this till a couple of days later for some reason. But we were up in Maine at the time. One day, I just talked about how odd I felt, and then Joan started telling me about seeing the smoke and how it went out like horizontally from one end to the other, just from the center, and then it came back together, and then went vertical and came back together and horizontal, and it did all that. And then finally, it was like a little ring, and she could see him. And after that, it just kind of broke the spell. And she doesn't know how many times it did this, horizontal, vertical thing in smoke, but
Mhm.
that was. We talked with a lady who introduced us, who was part Iroquois, and she said, "Well, that's um, the balancing. Oh, how did you pronounce that? Say that. But she actually turned her back to us for a moment, kind of meditate on it, and turned back to us. And anyway, it was a very symbolic thing. And we were about 2 or 3 years ago. We were listening to an archaeologist, university archaeologist down here, presentation in Alabama,
Mhm.
and he was talking about different symbols Native Americans have. And I thought, and he showed the circle within the circle, and the vertical and horizontal lines that stretch outward to the end. And I said, Joan, that's what you saw back then. We didn't know what that experience was, but anyway. And I know the first time I visited him, um, a ring flew off his finger that he had.
Wow.
Just went up and then came down. I was checking my recorder, but I mean, it did that, and I asked him. I said, "That's a very powerful spirit that does that." And I was sitting across from him, and I kept asking him if he found out what this meant. He says, "No message yet, but it was very powerful." And he just told me that it was a Mohawk woman who had given him the ring one time. He was out at a powwow, and she said, "You need to have a ring. You're out here without rings on your finger or something." And said every chief has to have a ring. So she gave him this ring, which was two coins, I think silver coins that she